I say all the time, there ain't but two kinds of folk in the world. And you're in one or two categories. You're either running scared or you're running free. I said to somebody yesterday, I don't hang out with scared Negroes because a scared Negro would get you killed. So you're either running scared or you're running free. And for me, freedom, by any other definition, Black freedom means to me that we have to have the courage, the conviction, the commitment, and the character to say what we see, to call it what it is, to speak truth to powerful and to the powerless. But that's our commitment, to tell the truth that we do know. And that's what you're trying to do every day. That's all I'm trying to do every day here on KBLA Talk 1580.
Welcome to the Justice and Power podcast. It is my extreme honor to welcome our special guest to today's broadcast. He is a legend within the African-American community, around the nation, and particularly within media. Our special guest today is Tavis Smiley. He's the host of Tavis Smiley on KBLA Talk 1580, the flagship radio station of Smiley Audio Media, Inc. Tavis is a best-selling author, advocate, and philanthropist, known and respected for his unapologetic progressivism. He is the recipient of nearly 20 honorary doctorate degrees. He's been honored with the star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame and recognized by Time magazine as one of the world's most 100 influential people. Please join me in welcoming Tavis Smiley to the show. How you doing, Tavis?
I'm well. If I can play that, be an ingrate. That's a kind introduction. But most importantly, I'm just a friend of Nekima's. That's all that really matters.
Well, I'm so glad that our paths crossed. First of all, with both of us hailing from Mississippi, being born there, and later moving to different places. So you moved from Gulfport, Mississippi to Indiana. So tell us a little bit about that transition. Do you remember part of your childhood in Mississippi and then what it was like moving to Indiana?
Yeah. So my father was stationed at a place in Biloxi called Keesler Air Force Base. My mother worked in the mess hall at that Air Force Base. That's how they connected. My father was actually from Georgia, my mother from Mississippi. So he was stationed in Mississippi at this Air Force Base. They connected. The rest, as they say, is history. And when I was just 2 or 3 years of age, my father got transferred to an Air Force Base in Indiana. So I was born in Mississippi, but didn't really grow up there. Spent most of my time growing up in the Midwest. But I remember Mississippi well because every summer I'd go back to spend this summer with my big mom. Not the entire summer, but every summer we travel back, spend time with her. At a certain point, as she aged and got more infirm, she moved to Indiana to live with us. And it sort of cut down on our trips to Mississippi. But certainly in my formative years, Nekima, I was in Mississippi every summer. M-I, crooked letter, I, crooked letter, I, humpback, I. So I love going to visit my grandmother, Big Mama down there. I still have many cousins down there. Don't get there as often as I used to, but I have many fond memories of spending summers in Mississippi on the Gulf Coast.
That sounds very similar to my experience, even right down to having a Big Mama. Going to Big Mama's house and just sitting with her for hours and hours and hearing the stories and learning about our people and learning about overcoming adversity. I think every Black person in America needs a Big Mama.
Oh, yeah.
We underscore the importance of wisdom from Black women and particularly Black women elders. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, first of all, I'll say amen. As we say in the Black church, we all need a Big Mama. Some of my fondest memories that came are, my grandmother lived literally just a few blocks from the beach, a few blocks from the Gulf of Mexico. And in Indiana, all you have are cornfields, right? I'm around much cornfields. Mm-hmm. But going to visit her in the summertime and literally being, 2 or 3 blocks from the beach was just amazing for me. So I loved that experience all the time. But what I really loved was sitting on the porch. My grandmother, Big Mama, had rocking chairs on her front porch and her back porch. And I used to love to sit on the porch with Big Mama in those rocking chairs. I love rocking chairs to this day. If you walk in my office right now, I own a building right on Crenshaw Boulevard. I've owned this building for almost 25 years. When I bought the radio station, I moved it into my building. Everybody in LA knows where the Smiley building is on Crenshaw Boulevard. When you walk in our lobby, there are a couple of really nice leather chairs, a really nice leather sofa. It's a beautiful lobby, but there are two rocking chairs in the lobby. And it always cracks me up to watch folk walk in our lobby. And if those seats are not taken, they always choose to sit in those rocking chairs. I got those rocking chairs and I loved them so much when I was with my grandmother in Mississippi down in Gulfport. So I love rocking chairs to these days, to this day. But I remember fondly, as you do, Nekima, those conversations with her. I used to particularly love to sit out there when it rained. I didn't know this word as a child, but I'm a pluviophile. I didn't know that then. I'm a pluviophile, one who loves the rain. It's been raining in LA lately. People are complaining about it. I actually like it, but I love the rain. But I used to love to sit outside under the cover of that porch when it was raining and just sit there at my big mom and we talk and fall asleep and wake up and talk some more. But I learned so much sitting at her feet. To this very day, if you were to ask me who I love talking to the most, I would tell you in a heartbeat. Nothing against young people. I was once young, but I would choose to talk to an older person, or let me be kinder, someone who's more chronologically gifted, shall we say. I would choose to talk to them over a younger person any day for the very reason that you put your finger on earlier. It's the wisdom. It's the wisdom that they have to share. And on my radio program or any place else, I love being in dialogue with persons who have wisdom to share. And Big Mama was one of those people.
Absolutely, I can relate to your story. I mean, it takes me back to Mississippi with tea cakes, with shucking
Oh, yeah.
peas, on the front porch, having
Yeah.
slop buckets, for the dogs, in the
Oh, yeah.
community where we live, and feeling safe. Because a lot of those Black communities, even though we know in Mississippi, the history and the mistreatment of Black folks under the law and out in society in general, those memories though have helped shape many of us and have helped to instill such a strong love for our people, our culture, our heritage, things that you cannot quantify in American society that we benefited from. And I think that your experience with your big mama, with growing up in an enclave, with feeling safe, with having that ancestral wisdom passed along to you was such a strong foundation for who you are and everything that you have been able to accomplish.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree. I said to somebody the other day, Nekima, that we are who we are because somebody loved us. We are who we are because somebody loved us. It may have been your mother, your father, could have been your big mama, Paw, could have been the person that adopted you, your aunt, your uncle, extended family. But every one of us, we are who we are because somebody chose to love us. I was in dialogue literally just this morning with somebody who used the phrase a couple of times, self-made millionaire, self-made millionaire. And I want to be kind and, to all of our guests, but I said, let me just say this. I know what you mean by that, by the use of that phrase, but I always get trouble when I hear that phrase self-made. And they said, why? I said, because ain't none of us self-made. You didn't birth yourself. You didn't birth yourself. You didn't burp yourself. You didn't bathe yourself. You didn't teach yourself how to read. You didn't teach yourself how to get out of a diaper and get on the toilet seat. I mean, et cetera, et cetera. But this phrase that we're self-made, ain't nobody self-made. Everybody is who they are because somebody along the way aided and abetted them in their journey. But that starts with somebody loving you. So I am who I am because somebody loved me. In this case, my big mama loved me dearly. And I miss her so much. A funny story right quick, if I can. My grandmother, big mama, as I said, came to live with us when she got a little older and came up. And one day I was on the Today Show, never forget it, on the Today Show, dating Jack Kemp, former vice presidential nominee and Republican congressman out of New York, was on the Today Show debating Jack Kemp. And when I got off the air, I got a message to call home, Tavis, phone home immediately. Now I'm scared, right? I'm like, why am I getting a message to call my mother's house? What's wrong? I call home, my mother answers the phone, and she says, Tavis, is that you? I said, yes. I said, is everything okay? I got your message. And she's kind of chuckling. So when I hear the chuckle, at least I know that whatever it is, it's not, Big Mama ain't passed away. Nothing tragic has happened to Kima. But she says, with a chuckle, I need you to talk to your Big Mama. I said, what's wrong? She said, just talk to her. I'm putting her on the phone right now. And I could hear Big Mama in the background. I kid you not. While my mother was chuckling, my Big Mama wasn't just crying, she was wailing. She was wailing in the background as if she was in some severe pain. And I couldn't juxtapose my mom chuckling with Big Mama wailing in this horrifying sort of sound in the background.
Mm.
My mother hands her the phone to Nekima. I get on the phone with my Big Mama, and she says, Tavis, we coming to get you. We coming to get you. You got to come home. I want to bring you home. We coming to get you. We coming to get you. I said, Big Mama, I'm in New York. I know we coming to get you. And she said, are you okay? I said, yes, Big Mama, I am fine. I said, what troubles you so? She said, I saw you on TV sassing that white man, and they're going to take you out and lynch you. They're going to hang you. And she, Nekima, could not have been more serious. So when you were laying out earlier all the issues that, we know that are part of the history of our beloved state of birth, Mississippi, in that moment, I sort of chuckled myself when I took what she was saying seriously. I literally had to calm her down, because in her lifetime, she cannot imagine that her grandbaby was on national television as she saw it sassing a white man. Until the day she died, we used to laugh about the fact that I eventually had to explain to her that's what I did for a living. And she could never get over the fact that these white folk, as she put them, the good white folk, were paying me to sass this white man. They paying you to do this? I said, yeah, Big Mama. We laughed about it until she took her last breath. But she, in that moment, saw me not on TV doing what you and I do, but she saw me as sassing a white man. And that's because of her experience being born and raised in segregated Jim and Jane Crow, Mississippi. And I've never forgotten that. But we thankfully got through it and didn't give her a heart attack. And we laughed about it till she died.
Well, like you said, though, she had a good reason to be concerned about hearing you assert yourself as a Black man, knowing the hostility, the brutality, the history of what we have endured in this country. And it's reminding me of a young man whose life has impacted so many of us, and that was Emmett Till.
Yes.
And what happened to him in Money, Mississippi. So I can imagine your grandmother thinking about people like Emmett Till and so many others who were silenced just by speaking their truth.
Yeah.
Can you unpack a little bit about what it was like and why your grandmother had those kinds of concerns?
Yeah, she had those memories. You put your finger on the pulse of it. She had those memories of Emmett Till. She was in Mississippi, obviously, when Emmett Till was murdered and eventually found in the Tallahatchie River. So she understood that clearly, and I think that was in the back of her mind when she saw her grandson putting herself, as it were, in harm's way. When you think about the story of Emmett Till, and you consider that for allegedly whistling at a white woman, they lynched him in the way that they did. And to know that my grandmother was fully aware of that story in Mississippi again, it was funny to some degree, and my mother got a chuckle out of it. But the more I wrestled with it, it really sobered me, to be honest with you, Nekima. I got sobered by it because I realized that what she was saying to me was a direct result of what she had endured. And Emmett Till is a part of that story. I've had the honor in my career to interview just about everybody, including Nekima Levy Armstrong. I remember the 2 or 3 occasions that I had time to sit with Mamie Till Mobley, Emmett Till's mother, and just to hear her recount to me face to face what that horrific experience was like and what it was all about. I was friends with John H. Johnson, the founder of Ebony and Jet magazines, and had many occasions to talk to him about the decision he made to put Emmett's mutilated body on the cover of that magazine. Because Mrs. Mamie Till Mobley wanted the world to see, as she said, what they had done to her baby, and how Mr. Johnson putting that photo of Emmett on the cover of the magazine really changed the civil rights movement. I had the honor of being friends with Rosa Parks and having her tell me, Mrs. Parks, any number of times, how when she sat on that bus, Emmett Till was going through her mind. So yes. When you ask this question, I got goosebumps because I'm thinking of people in my own lifetime that I've had a chance to know and befriend and to talk to and hear firsthand their stories of what those days, those vicious, ugly days down south were like.
Absolutely. And I think that sometimes we take for granted what those conditions were really like. I mean, I think about my own grandmother who was a cafeteria lady who
Mm.
talked to me about picking cotton when she was younger. And when she first found out that I was speaking out
Mm.
about racial injustice, her concerns, which are similar to what your big mama felt,
Yeah.
knowing that it's really unsafe, even if they're paying you to do it.
Yeah.
Ultimately, we do still have to keep our guard up because of
Mhm.
the kind of society that we live in
Yeah.
and the fact that it is often anti-Black and
Mm.
it's dangerous for us, whether you're speaking up or not, but even more so when you have a voice, when you can articulate the issues, and when you're unapologetic
Mm.
about the words that you speak and articulating who we are as a people.
Yeah, and the sad tragedy, the sad reality of all of this is that here we are all these years later, as you well know, being on the front lines of these fights in Minneapolis and beyond. We're still wrestling with the same scenario, the same reality. They're just modern day lynchings, right? Recently on my radio program during Black History Month, we did something that I thought was a pretty cool idea, and I'm glad that it resonated so beautifully with the audience, Nekima. But I wanted to harken back to the early days of radio when radio was about storytelling. And
Mhm.
so I worked with a couple of brothers who are both actors, a brother named Gerald C. Rivers, who plays a brilliant, looks like him, sounds like him, Dr. King. Another brother named Maurice Kitchen, who looks and sounds like Malcolm. And Maurice wrote the script and we did our edits on it. But literally on the last day of Black History Month, we promoted it for weeks in advance and everybody couldn't wait to hear it. We did a radio play called The Return. And the play essentially is Martin and Malcolm. Just imagine this now. Martin and Malcolm, 50 plus years after their respective assassinations, return to Earth for 1 hour.
Mm.
And they decide to spend that 1 hour in conversation with a guy named Tavis Smiley on KBLA Talk 1580. And Tavis welcomes them into his studio. And for an hour, we get a chance to ask Martin and Malcolm about the contemporary issues that we are wrestling with to hear what they might say. The beauty for the audience is they get a chance to hear and see these two brothers that look and sound, these brilliant actors, these great thespians who look and sound just like Dr. King. But the real thing for me is that pretty much everything they said, here's where I'm going with this. And I know you know I'm going already. Pretty much everything they said in the answer to all the contemporary questions that we're wrestling with in late modernity that I asked them about were things that they uttered in their working witness or wrote in their working witness while they were here. So the audience gets exposed to a side of Martin and Malcolm, including their humor and their humanity that they had never had a chance to really wrap their minds around until they heard this radio play called The Return. I only raised that because it resonated so beautifully with the audience to hear these two brothers come back to earth and address the issues like Black Lives Matter, like the killing of George Floyd, and the list goes on and on and on. Climate change and all the things that the gap between black and white still in this country. We made the point that Black people, economically speaking, are still 3/5 of a person. Why? We earn 3/5 to this day of what the white community earns. So we're still, economically speaking, 3/5 of a person. All that stuff sort of came out in this 1 hour radio play. I raised it only because the more things change, the more they stay the same. And here you and I are talking about, and you with great courage and great conviction and great commitment and great character, put yourself on the front lines to fight these fights and to raise these issues. Is why I love you, respect you so much. But it's just tragic that all these years after your big mama and my big mama, we still wrestling with these modern day lynchings of Black men and Black women in 2023 and sadly beyond.
Absolutely. First of all, I want to hear
Yeah.
that conversation. I
The
gotta go into the
podcast is up now.
archives.
If you go to the podcast is up, so you go to any of our platforms. They're all KBLA 1580. Go to KBLA 1580, and you'll find it's called The Return. And I'd love to have you listen and call me private and let me know what you think about it.
Absolutely. I can't wait to listen. I would even love to see it turned into a play on Broadway.
Yeah. Mm. I
I
would love
think
that
there
too.
would be so much interest
Yeah.
in people being able to hear this conversation and realize how interconnected and interrelated the struggles that they articulated in the 50s and 60s are to what is happening today.
Yes.
And they warned us about a lot of these things. If these things aren't corrected, here's what's going to happen. So their prophetic voices continue to ring true. And when I go back and look at what they read, what they wrote, I'm just blown away because they map out a lot of the same issues that we are grappling with today. And instead of people embracing that, what are we seeing? Attacks on African American history.
That's
People
right.
trying to get our history out of the schools and erase our history. What are your thoughts on this faux attack on
Yeah.
Black history and on critical race theory that we're dealing with right now?
The short answer is that it's scary. There are any number of people who want to look at Ron DeSantis in Florida as a political figure, but he's so much more than that. He's dangerous. He's dangerous. I try to be careful, and I advise people to be careful about putting the Jews in your mouth. Dave Chappelle made that point when he was hosting Saturday Night Live. You got to be careful what you say about our Jewish brothers and sisters, and you got to be careful about invoking the Holocaust and invoking Hitler. And you got to be careful because there's nothing really to gain by comparing tragedies. The Middle Passage versus the Holocaust, there ain't nothing there. You don't gain anything by comparing tragedies. So I understand, and again, I advise people to be careful when they invoke those kinds of moments, critical moments, horrific moments in world history. And yet, I say this unapologetically. This is how it started in Germany, with Hitler and others denying people certain rights, books that can't be read, African-American AP courses in real time that can't be taught. This is where that starts. And so you can laugh Ron DeSantis off. You cannot take him seriously. But right now, I was talking again in Black History Month with a Du Bois scholar who has a new book coming out about the great Black intellectual W.B. Du Bois, the first African-American to get a PhD from Harvard. And we were talking about the fact that there are books now that Du Bois has written that it is illegal to teach about or teach from in Florida. I was discussing in that conversation that there are school districts, to your point, Nekima, you well know this, there are school districts right now in Florida that are warning their teachers, hide certain books, hide the books, hide them away somewhere. Don't teach from them. Don't reference them because we're afraid you may be arrested and sent to jail. I mean, this is America. And here we are in 2023. And again, so I don't want to belabor the point, but I don't look at Ron DeSantis as merely a political figure. He is a dangerous man. And to the extent that we talk about this around the fringes and don't call it what it is, I think there's going to be a huge price to pay for this down the line. But this is how that nonsense, this is how anarchy begins.
Absolutely. And people are being indoctrinated, listening to the language that he's speaking, knowing, first of all, critical race theory is not even being taught in our elementary schools, middle schools, or high schools. The first time I even really heard the term and wrapped my mind around it was in law school, right? So it's like a high level theoretical framework that is used to contextualize, many of these social systems and connect them to our history. And that is being taught as misinformation to folks who are ignorant as to what is really going on. And also who are upset, in my opinion, that you had someone like Donald Trump who did not win re-election and all of the hatred that was stoked during that time, and how a lot of this started coming to the surface after the January 6th attacks that you and I have talked about on KBLA, and how a lot of that is still being largely swept under the rug. Why is this conversation about African American history and the need to allegedly ban our history taking precedence over what happened on January 6th?
Yeah.
That's a problem.
No, it's a real problem. And the short answer for me, Nekima, is truth. America has always had a problem wrestling with, dealing with, accepting the truth. It seems so simple on its surface, but that's what it boils down to, that we can't handle dealing with the truth, much less teaching the truth in our classrooms. And the closer you get to that moment in American history, we're on the way there, where for the first time ever, this country will be made up of, it'll be a minority country where people of color will make up the majority. What do? When you can't change the game, you change the rules. You can't change the game, you change the rules. So all of these attacks on Black history being taught, on the truth being taught, on immigration of certain people who have a certain skin tones, while we let Ukrainians in, almost unchecked, and continue to send billions of our taxpayer dollars to fight that war because they look a certain way. Don't get me started. It's that we don't want to deal with the truth. And so again, you can't change the game. You change the rules. And it's, I mentioned Du Bois earlier. Du Bois once asked the question, would America have been America without her Negro people? Just think about that for a second. Would America have been America without her Negro people? I say all the time, and I believe this, I do not believe America is a democracy as yet. At best, Nekima, it seems to me that we are an experiment in democracy. Now, we've got a Madisonian framework to work inside of, but at best, we are an experiment in democracy. We ain't a democracy yet. I could argue on being a plutocracy, on being an oligarchy, or worse.
Or a republic.
But we're not as yet, but we're not as yet a democracy, right? And so here we are wrestling with this Du Boisian question of would America have been America without our Negro people? And on this side of Black History Month, it reminds us that if you take Black folk out of the experiment in democracy, the whole thing falls flat. It just, the whole thing just falls flat. If you take Black folk in business, in entertainment, in sport, in politics, in every field of human endeavor, if you take Negroes out of the American democratic experiment, the whole thing just implodes. It falls flat. The fact that people can't answer that question of whether or not America would be America without her Negro people, without demonizing and cast aspersion on other groups of people, is a problem. But that's fundamentally what it boils down to. They don't want to deal with the truth, and none of us should be surprised by that. But at the same time, we can't abandon our responsibility still on the front lines, because if we let them go back to the good old days, that's exactly what they'll do.
Absolutely. Just with that question of would America be America, we know that the answer is no, right? Our people helped build this country, even though they don't want to give us reparations, which is what we rightfully deserve as a starting point for the harm that has been caused. We know that America would not be what it is today without Black folks, right? Even when we think about the system of capitalism and how dependent it is on Black labor and Black subjugation and all of the oppression that is connected to the system of capitalism, there is sort of a strange marriage between white America and Black America in that regard, right? The whole system, even the revisionist history, is built upon that strange marriage that they want to deny.
Yeah, I say all the time, there's nothing wrong with capitalism except for the fact that they always get the capital and we get the ism, the racism, the sexism, the cronyism, the good old boyism, the anti-Semitism. You do it all day long, right? They get the capital, we get the ism. Again, if you can't wrap your brain around accepting and dealing with the truth, you recall during the Trump era, they advanced this notion of alternative facts, not the truth, but we are offering alternative facts. What is that? So if you can't wrestle with the truth about the contributions that African Americans have made, then you really ain't ready for no conversation about a deep and earnest critique of capitalism as we know it. They really don't want to have that conversation. For that matter, we will play around the edges of having a conversation about equality, but never a conversation about equity. So think about it. There's so many conversations that we're willing to have. Others we don't want to come anywhere near. And I submit to you, there's a reason why there's some things we ain't got a problem talking about. And other things, whoa, Nelly, we don't want to go nowhere near that stuff.
Exactly. And we just saw that recently when we were asking for the passage of the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. And instead we got a Juneteenth holiday.
That's right.
That only a small number of people were asking for. I'm like, wait a minute. This is not equal in terms of what we requested versus what we got.
And not just that. You're right. It's not just the fact that only a few folk were asking for it as compared to the George Floyd, Policing Act, but that the good white folk worked overtime to give it to us. I ain't never seen nothing get turned around so fast in Washington.
That quick.
I looked up, I said, where'd this come from? I mean, I ain't mad at the day off, but at the end of the day, how did they turn this thing around so quickly? So here again, they get to determine what's in our best interest as they see it. And it's all about lip service. It's all about lip service. And it just, again, it just troubles me that we can't wrap our brains or have an earnest and honest conversation about what's causing this country such trouble and such travail. And here's the real problem. There's so many things, back to my point earlier, that I don't think we're yet a democracy. We are at best an experiment in democracy. But whatever we have right now, for the sake of argument, let's just call it a democracy. Our democracy is fragile, extremely fragile. I think of the words of the song from Atlantic Starr. The song starts out, it's a fragile situation. It can fall apart at any time. You know the song, if your heart isn't in it, why don't you tell me so? If your heart ain't in it, I could have gone long ago. But I love the start of that song off the break. It's a fragile situation that could fall apart at any time. They were talking about a relationship between a man and a woman. I'm talking about our relationship to America. It's a fragile situation that could fall apart at any time. And I think it's our hubris and this notion of American exceptionalism that we preach all the time, even though the data suggests in a variety of ways, we are no longer the great nation that we once thought we were. We can't have an earnest conversation about how close to the precipice we are of this country imploding. I'm a student of history, and my read of history, Nekima, suggests to me that there ain't no empire in the history of the world that did not at some point have its comeuppance. Every empire eventually falters and fails, but our arrogance, our hubris, won't even allow us to consider how close to the edge we are when it comes to our democracy teetering on the brink of collapse. And I can give you a number of things we had at the time that I think are threats to our very democracy. Poverty, top of my list, is a threat to our very democracy. This gap between the have-gots and the have-nots is not sustainable. It cannot continue to grow, and on and on and on goes the list. And you could add to that list yourself in your own brilliance. But there's so many things that we refuse to address in real time, in late modernity, that I think are putting us closer and closer to the brink of collapse in this great democracy that we better start to take more seriously sooner than later.
Absolutely. And if you think back to Dr. King's words, right, when he wanted to launch that Poor People's Campaign, and he talked about the what happened to Black folks cashing a blank check, you know, that was supposed to be for us. We haven't gotten anything but crumbs. He talked about the need for universal health care. He talked about the need for affordable housing, a guaranteed minimum income for all Americans back in the 60s. And I would say that that's when he really became dangerous, when he started speaking the truth about ending poverty in this country and paying attention to what was happening to the poorest of the poor in the most marginalized communities in this country. And that's when we saw him sadly being assassinated at the start of his discussion about poverty. Now, this is after he'd already put his body on the line so many times.
No, as you well know, I wrote a book about the last year of his life. It's called Death of a King. And of the 23, 24 books I've written, it is the one that still means the most to me and the one that people have responded to. Well, the Covenant with Black America was the New York Times #1 bestseller for many, many weeks. But so was
Very powerful.
Yeah, thank you. So was the Death of a King book. But that King book means so much to me because King is my hero. I say all the time, this is my own assessment. For me, he's the greatest American this country's ever produced. That's just me. One that has to subscribe to my philosophy, but I think he's the greatest American we've ever produced. But I know that last year of his life so well because I wrote a book about it called Death of a King. And you're absolutely spot on that when he came out on April 4, 1967, and delivered his Beyond Vietnam speech at the Riverside Church on the west side of Manhattan, that put a target on his back. April 4, 1967, he gives this speech. Literally 1 year to the day later, almost to the very hour, April 4, 1968, they murdered Dr. King on that balcony in Memphis. But that speech where he said to America, you America, these are Martin's words, you America are the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today. That's a bold thing for a Negro back in 1967 to say to the good white folk that you are the greatest purveyors of violence in the world today. You know, white folk like Martin, we gave you Nobel Peace Prize. We let you run in your lane of civil rights. But now, Negro, you're talking about not just civil rights, but silver rights. And that is not a lane we gave you permission to run in. And they went in on Martin. And for the last year or so of his life, he was persona non grata. He was toxic. Everybody and everything, including black folk, turned against Dr. King. It was as if in the last year of his life, Nekima, the cosmos shifted against him. It's not till 20 years plus later when we rethink Dr. King, and then we get a holiday and all that good stuff. But when King died on that balcony in Memphis, he died persona non grata. He died a toxic man. Folk had turned against him. He was disinvited to speak in black churches, disinvited to speak at colleges and universities. The media, the white media turned against him. The black media turned against him. The bourgeois Negroes turned against him because he was getting into a tete-a-tete with Lyndon Johnson, who had been friendly to us on voting rights and civil rights. So Lyndon Johnson's White House turns against him. And then all the bourgeois Negroes who were close to Johnson, they turned against him. The everyday young folk turned against him. They wanted black power, Stokely, H. Rap Brown, Huey P. Newton. So everybody sort of, the cosmos, as I said, sort of shifts against him in his last year. And a lot of this we got to in our radio play, The Return, that we talked about earlier in this conversation. But I love Dr. King so much that at the end of the day, he was as advertised. None of that stopped him from speaking his truth. And one of the last things he uttered in the hotel room at the Lorraine before he walked out on that balcony and was tragically murdered was saying to his team, I would rather be dead than be afraid. I'd rather be dead than be afraid. And 5 minutes later, he was dead.
That is extremely powerful. I think one, he had a premonition. Two, that they were trying to bring him down for speaking the truth unapologetically and boldly. And also, I remember him saying, I just want to do God's will.
That's right.
That was the North Star for him with everything that he was focused on, whether they hated him, whether they liked him, whether they dismissed him. I just want to do God's will. It takes a special person to get to that point when your back is against the wall, when you're being attacked from all sides, when your enemies are trying to come against you, to stop and say, I just want to do God's will. I got chills. Even as we are talking about, it's like the spirit of Dr. King is reminding us of what's important. It's not always who is in your corner in terms of people, because God plus one is a majority. That's who he rode with until the wheels fell off. And he knew that at the end of his life, like he said, I've been to the mountaintop. I've seen the promised land. I might not get there with you, but we're going to get there. Think about all the seeds that he planted that we're still feeding off of in the 21st century. Yeah. Only somebody walking with God at that level could do what he did, could stand the way that he stood, could say what he said. Only if you walking with God could you get to that point. And knowing you still feeding generation after generation after generation, even with their concerted attempts to try to hide the truth. Because think about when January 15th rolls around, how we get a sanitized, false version, anemic version of who Dr. King was and what he stood for.
No, you're preaching to the choir. You're preaching to the choir, and it's a powerful sermon. Speaking of sermons and the evolution that King had undergone in the last couple of years of his life, as he became more radical, you're making the point now. We want the sanitized, deodorized, defamed version of King. What my friend Cornel West calls the Santa Clausification of Martin King. The Santa Clausification of him. We want to just make him a jolly old man with a bag of toys on his back, a big smile on his face, talking about his dream. Only West could call it the Santa Clausification of King. But I remind people, and I write this in my text, Death of a King, that had Martin made it back to Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, where he co-pastored with his father, Daddy King, had he made it back to Atlanta for Sunday morning, he'd already told his assistant what his sermon was going to be for Sunday morning. And the theme of his sermon, the title of his sermon for Sunday morning, once he left Memphis and got back home, was going to be Why America May go to hell. Why America may go to hell. So here's a guy who people see as the dreamer that we were just talking about, but not wanting to wrestle with the radical Martin, who's going to preach a sermon called Why America May Go to Hell. It reminds me of simply this, that your mission and my mission and the mission of all of us who would be truth tellers is to commit ourselves to seek the truth, speak the truth, stand on the truth, and stay with the truth. That's our mission, to seek the truth, to speak the truth, to stand on the truth, and to always stay with the truth. And that doesn't mean that, that you and I have a monopoly on the truth. You got to be humble enough, to realize that there is the truth and there is the way to the truth. And sometimes folks are on their way to the truth. You can't be arrogant about that. But the truth that you do know, you're obligated to tell. Toni Morrison once told me, Tavis, somebody has to have the courage to say what they see. Somebody's got to be willing to say what they see. So all these griots that you and I have been talking about in this conversation today, and all the lessons they've imparted, are the things that we have to take to heart. We have to take seriously. And I say all the time, there ain't but two kinds of folk in the world. Either you're running scared or you're running free. And you're in one or two categories. You're either running scared or you're running free. I said to somebody yesterday, I don't hang out with scared Negroes because a scared Negro would get you killed. So you're either running scared or you're running free. And for me, freedom, by any other definition, Black freedom, by any other definition, Nekima Armstrong, means to me that we have to have the courage, the conviction, the commitment, and the character to say what we see, to call it what it is, to speak truth to powerful and to the powerless. But that's our commitment, to tell the truth that we do know. And that's what you're trying to do every day. That's all I'm trying to do every day here on KBLA Talk 1580.
That is so powerful. I need to write that down, Tavis. It needs to be on a t-shirt. It needs to be on a billboard, because it's such a powerful reminder of what's really important. Not all of the distractions that we're constantly being inundated with, but the truth that you just spoke is what we need to take to heart as we move forward. Because I remember Dr. King writing that book, Where Do We Go From Here?
That's it.
Right? That's still an open question.
Open question.
In terms of what we're going to do. So as we close out our conversation today, I feel like we've been in church. I feel like I should be passing a collection plate, all the knowledge that you just dropped on us.
No, that's you, bro. That ain't me. That's you. That's you dropping all this knowledge. I'm just listening. I'm taking it all in.
I'm just listening. I'm just taking it in. But where do we go from here? What are your words to Black America? Where do we go from here?
Yeah. Let me close with this. We've talked about Dr. King in this conversation, Nekima, and I've enjoyed this immensely. Thank you for the invitation to join you on your podcast, and congratulations on your podcast. I want to close with the words of King. I just give you two or three things that are just in my spirit right now that came out of his mouth in no particular order. Number one, he said that no lie can live forever. That truth crushed to earth shall rise again. No lie can live forever. He said that cowardice asks, is it safe? Expediency asks, is it politic? Vanity asks, is it popular? But conscience asks, is it right? And every now and then we must take positions, Nekima, that are either safe, politic, comfortable, or convenient, but we do it because our conscience tells us that it's right. And then he finally said this, that if it falls your lot in life, Black folk, if it falls your lot in life to be a street sweeper, then you sweep the streets like Michelangelo painted pictures. You sweep the streets like Beethoven wrote music. You sweep the streets like Shakespeare wrote poetry. You sweep those streets so well, if that's your lot, that when you die, all the host of heaven will have to pause and say, here live a great street sweeper. And then he closed by offering us this. And this is what I close with today, offering this to you and to me and to everybody listening and watching right now, that every one of us as Black folk should commit ourselves to engaging our work and our witness and doing it so well that the dead, the living, or the unborn couldn't do it any better. If you commit yourself to your work and witness at that level, to do it so well that the dead, the living, and folk they ain't been born yet couldn't do it any better. That's how we advance our people. That's how we advance our causes. That's how we honor the lives and legacies of those Black folks whose names we know and those whose names we don't know, but all who nonetheless put everything they had on the line so that you and I can be here right now engaged in this conversation. Nekima Levy Armstrong, I love you. Ain't nothing you can do about it. I just love you. I appreciate you. I thank you for this opportunity, my sister.
I love you too, Tavis. You know that I adore you. I appreciate you. I learned from you. And I know you made Big Mama proud. I know she's in heaven cheering you on. Thank you for this masterclass that you just provided to our listening audience. Please support all the work that Tavis is doing. KBLA 1580 Talk Radio. They drop knowledge day and night, unapologetically progressive, unapologetically Black. Thank you for your service to our community and your service to humanity. We appreciate you, Tavis.
Appreciate you. Love you back.